community event. It's held annually. It's the largest WordCamp in the UK, and it's an opportunity really to get involved and support an event for the wider community. We do ask that people are available on Monday evenings for an hour for a Slack meeting, just to go through and ensure that we're able to manage the event there. As we get a bit closer to the events, there is a bit more time required, but we can, if you have any questions, myself or we've got a few from the team. Do you want to put your hand up if you're on the team this year, or have you been on the team? You have an experience? So if you do have any questions, you want to know a bit more, have a look around. The people who've got their hands up at the moment can answer those for you. Good question. Right, we have a slight challenge in that we can't officially announce the dates until we have the venue confirmed. Because of the venue that we use for WordCamp London, we are tied to their catering. So we're trying to wrap up the catering aspect before we confirm the venue. So it's kind of just getting our dominoes in a row at the moment before we can push forward with that. I would say provisionally we are working on the first weekend of April, but that is not an official announcement by any means. And that may possibly change that date. Any other questions about WordCamp London at all? Keith? Sure, so the web team, in fact, have we got anybody? Gary, were you involved in the team this year? Do you want to give a quick overview?
Yeah, so basically the WordCamp structure means you have a choice of, I think it's 3 starting themes, and it's basically just implementing the design. So the design team, who looks already to be set up there, will come up with a design for the website, and it's just implementing those. The fun bit is that you can only use CSS. You have no PHP access to edit at all, so no functions.php, no customizing. So it's a challenge in itself, is to see what can you do with CSS, which I'm sure, absolutely, Keith, that you will love doing such a thing like that, knowing full well that you have given talks on CSS before, and you can use all your futures.css and everything like that. So yeah, it's all, you can support SAS and so on. So yeah, just nod and we'll get you on. So
excellent. So Keith, we strike out that website team, do we? Excellent, thank you. Any other questions at all about WordCamp London and potentially getting involved? Yes.
Does the event still look for sponsors, and what are the benefits of sponsorships?
Great question. Yes, absolutely. The event will be looking for sponsors. Once we have a confirmed date, one of the first things we'll be doing is putting out a call for sponsors. And we're working through at the moment the packages and in terms of the benefits. And we have 2 key focuses for WordCamp London 2019, sustainability and content. So we are wanting to ensure that we're creating a sustainable event, a sustainable future for this and other WordCamps. So we want to try and support potentially new models and new ways of looking at things like sponsorship. Also, sponsorship is a key area for us because we want to be working with the sponsors to be providing the best experience for both attendees and companies, enabling us to be able to have the event. So there will be a sponsorship pack available, but it will be a little bit further down the road from now. So yes, thank you. Great question. Anybody else? Yes. Yeah, no, so the sponsors team are the people that are supporting, wrangling the sponsors, if you like, bringing together. Yes. Yeah. Anything else? Any other questions? If you are interested in getting involved, do come and have a chat with any one of us that had our hands up earlier on, and we can certainly point you in the right direction where to get involved, or the alternative place would be wpslack.uk if you're not already on the UK Slack community. If you head to this web address, you can drop your email address in. You'll get an invite into the UK Slack community. I think there's about 950 odd people in there now. It's a great place to continue the conversations, discussions that you may be having here. A really good place to continue that kind of networking. There are many channels within that team, varying with a very wide variety of subject matters. So yes, if you're not in there, do head over to wpslack.uk. A couple of other things. 5.0 Beta 1 released today. So a few heads drop, a few smirks. For those of you, anybody, I don't like to assume things, so 5.0 will be coming with the new editor. The project has been named Gutenberg. So if you're not familiar with this, and if you don't understand why a few heads have dropped and a few heads are shaking, it's definitely worth looking into Gutenberg. It's the new content editor, as I mentioned. It will change. It's going to be changing the way that we are editing content within WordPress. There's a lot of changes. The UI is very, very drastically different from the current classic editor that we have within the WordPress post editor screen. This is very much in development still. Do not install on live environment. Big letters for that one. If you're not familiar, Gutenberg has been an ongoing project for 2+ years now. There's been an awful lot of work, an awful lot of contribution to create this, to get it to where it is today. There are still issues and there are still things that need to be resolved. If you are interested in supporting the project, then do head over, have a look at the 5.0 beta page. You'll find various links there that will enable you to get involved and support. This page particularly picks up on the translation. There's some known issues with 5.0 and Gutenberg and the inability to use Latin's characters. So translation is a high priority for 5.0. I think there's a project to get 100 languages translated before this goes live. So yes, lots of work to be done. We've also got PHP 7.3 coming down the line. RC4 is due for release today, and we've got a general release due 13th of December 2018. So if you're a plugin developer, theme developer, it's worth getting this, testing it, making sure that you're not going to be breaking your plugins, themes, etc. aren't going to be breaking with this update. Some other events going on in and around the space. We've got the St Albans Meetup happening on the 1st of November. See meetup.com for more details on that one. PHP London also happening, so they happen on the first Thursday of every month. So if you're interested, again, head over to meetup.com for more details. And as always, we've got WP Essex. It's another event that I'm heavily involved with. 15th of November for the next one. We run these on the third Thursday of every month. Mike Simjasir is also involved. So again, if you have any questions, if you have any contacts out that way, then please do spread the word. We'd love to see more people there. We also have WP Suffolk. If we want to go a bit further out, 8th of November, that's the second Thursday of every month. And if we want to head a bit further north, we've got WP Liverpool. So that's the first Thursday of every month. So the 1st of November is the next meetup for Liverpool. All of these events wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for the fact that we were running a charity called WPN Up. WPN Up focuses on supporting and promoting positive mental health within the community. We are just about to come up to our first anniversary of bringing together the trustees. We're putting together an impact report for this charity. It's completely unfunded right now, so we are at a point where we are now looking for funding. So if you are a business, if you are interested in getting more information on what we're doing or how it has impacted the community to date, we'd love to share those details with you. So again, do kind of chat with me, and we can get that sorted out. Okay, that's definitely enough from me. I'm now going to hand you over to Tom. Tom is a sustainability nut, in his own words. He's a designer and co-founder of the WordPress digital agency Wholegrain Digital. And tonight's going to be giving a talk on why a greener web is good for everyone. So please give Tom a big round of applause. Just have to forgive us for a moment while we just swap over laptops. Talk among yourselves for a moment.
Thank you. Okay, so yeah, as Dan said, I'm going to be talking about why a greener web is good for everyone. It's a topic that I know there's a few people here who are really interested in it. There's probably a lot of people here who've never really even thought about how sort of environmental issues and the internet relate to each other. So I'm going to talk about climate change. You're going to have to bear with me on this. If you're a climate change denier, you can send me rude tweets to @eatwholegrain. But I'm going to talk about it anyway. So basically, about 10 years ago, one of the world's most prominent climate scientists, James Hansen, who was head of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies at the time, together with some other climate scientists, released a report where they said that a temperature rise of 1 degree C would lead to practically irreversible ice sheet and species loss. So this was 10 years ago, and they later revised their report to say actually 1 degree C is too much. That's going to be even more dangerous than they thought. And the only viable solution to guarantee a safe level would be to reduce greenhouse gases to below 350 parts per million. And at the time, the atmosphere was at 385. So fast forward 10 years, and we've now already reached 1 degree C, and we're at 410 parts per million. So we're not really heading in the right direction. And this month, the IPCC, you may have seen it in the news, it's one of the ones that got actually a lot of media attention. The IPCC, International Panel on Climate Change, released their special report on warming of 1.5 degrees, which states that if we continue at this rate, the planet will warm to around 1.5 degrees in just 12 years. So that's really soon. We're talking 2030. And this is just the beginning. Basically, if we carry on the track we're on, we're heading for 3 to 4 degrees long term. And 3 to 4 degrees, if you ask any serious climate scientist, is basically we're not here anymore. So that's the depressing stuff. Bit more depressing stuff. Thomas Stocker, who used to be head of the IPCC or co-chair of the IPCC, basically said 2020 is a really critical year. That's the year at which we need to turn the direction. So at 2020, we need to start seeing global emissions on the decrease. If we can achieve that, then we're in the right direction. So we've got a couple of years to get there, but it's going to be tough. So the big question, is Earth fucked? And this was the actual official title of a presentation by Brad Werner, who's a geophysicist at the University of California. And it's very kind of unusual for a scientist to use such a title in their presentations. Normally they're very formal. And but he was frustrated that nobody was listening, basically. So he got his attention for this one. And his answer was probably. So he ran a whole load of computer simulations, not on climate modeling itself, but on human behavior modeling. And he ran loads of different scenarios about legislation changes, scientific discoveries, different sort of economic scenarios. And basically what he found was the only one that showed that we would avert sort of climate disaster was active resistance from the people, which basically means that rather than us lots thinking, don't worry, the politicians will solve it, or don't worry, there'll be a scientific discovery, or don't worry, an engineer will invent some way of sucking CO2 out the atmosphere. The only scenario that he found that actually showed like a decent chance of us sort of having a positive future was where everybody takes responsibility and starts saying, okay, well, I'm going to see what I can do in whatever way and really go for it. So hence I'm at a WordPress meetup talking about this because we've got to really go for it in the WordPress community. So now we're going to talk about websites. So if you're wondering, do websites even produce carbon emissions? The answer is yes, and they produce a lot. So basically, the internet uses about 416 terawatt hours of electricity every year. And to give you perspective, the United Kingdom uses about 416 terawatt hours of electricity. So that's like the whole country is equivalent to the internet. And in terms of CO2 emissions, that electricity is equivalent to 2% of global emissions. 2% doesn't sound that much, but it's the same as the whole aviation industry, which, you know, people typically think flying is really bad for the environment, but actually the internet has the same carbon footprint. And if the internet was a country, it would be the 6th worst polluter in the world. It would be roughly equivalent to Germany. So to give you a bit more sort of perspective, Brad Smith, president of Microsoft, he said, across the tech sector, we need to recognize that data centers will rank amongst the largest users of electrical power on the planet by the middle of the next decade. And that's really the point here, is that although we think the internet is clean, although it's kind of this invisible, inert thing that's all wonderful and just exists on our screens, the whole thing depends on electricity. And that's really the backbone of it. Basically, data effectively doesn't exist really without electricity. You can't write it, you can't read it, you can't transmit it without using some electricity. And when you create electricity, even from renewables, there's going to be a CO2 output. And if we think about the equation that data equals electricity equals CO2, then we also need to think about the direction we're going in with the internet. So although there's a lot of good stuff going on, you know, page sizes for average web pages are 20 times what they were in 2003. So if you think about that as a direct correlation, if we had the web pages we had in 2003, the emissions from the websites we build would be about 5% of what they are. Not to mention all the other stuff like streaming, cryptocurrencies, Internet of Things. All of this is, you know, massively accelerating the amount of data that we're using. And a Cisco report basically predicted that if we carry on like this, which they think we will, we'll get to 3.5% of global CO2 emissions coming from the internet within 10 years. So a greener web literally is good for everyone, because we've got to get our CO2 emissions down, and if we have a good world to live in, then that's good for everybody. But there are other benefits, and I'll come on to those. And I'm going to sort of give the examples of how we can actually green the internet in the work that we do in WordPress. So the first thing is measure our impact. One of the big challenges as web designers is all very well saying, oh yeah, okay, so we need to reduce our impact, but if you don't know how to measure it, then you're kind of just guessing. And Peter Drucker said you can't manage what you can't measure, which is, you know, pretty good advice. So we built a carbon calculator. We looked around all the academic data that was out there on energy consumption from the internet, CO2 emissions from the internet, and we basically worked this into a formula initially in a spreadsheet for our own use, and then put it into a tool that anybody can use to give you an idea of what the emissions are. And it's an estimator because all carbon calculators, although they call themselves calculators, they're all estimators. But you can go there, website carbon.com, stick in a web address. It's better if you put in the amount of page views, because that gives you a sense of like, the total amount of data that your website's using every year, and it will give you an idea. So the data that we've got from this shows that the average website tested produces about 2.25 grams of CO2 per page view. So that's like I can't remember what's 2.25 grams. I think it's like a sugar cube. But that's gas. So every time someone clicks on a web page and loads that web page, there's a sugar cube of CO2 somewhere coming from a power station, basically, going into the atmosphere. And we measure it per page view because that means that you can basically you've got a level playing field to compare different websites, and you can benchmark your work against other websites, your competitors, your old website, whatever you like. So the greenest website that we've ever tested so far is this beauty, and it's davidandk.me.uk, and it's 0.004 grams per page view according to our carbon calculator. It's just so efficient, it's unbelievable. And the best thing about it is that it's hosted on a Raspberry Pi in the back of their cupboard. So I'm a big fan of David and Kay. Contrast that with the dirtiest website that we've tested, which is thefamily.co. 57 grams per page view. I mean, I don't know what's going on here, but for perspective, 14,331 visitors of David and Kay is equivalent to one visitor of the family. So hopefully this gives some sort of perspective that if we do our jobs really, really well, that we can actually massively reduce energy consumption and carbon emissions from websites. So reducing data transfer. So that's the next big thing. We've kind of benchmarked where we're at. Now we want to reduce data transfer. I'm going to use our own website sort of as an example of this because we redid it recently with this in mind. So I'll talk through a few of the things that we did. The first thing that we did, and this is not a technical thing, but it's really, it's sort of something that everyone in the project should be involved in. Set a page weight budget. So this really focuses the mind of everybody in the project team. Rather than just designing a website and then at the end of it thinking, okay, well, how can we make it really efficient? Start by basically setting a target and saying, well, the pages can't be more than a certain number of kilobytes. So our old website, our homepage was 881 kilobytes. We thought, well, let's aim for half of that, which would be 440. And important things here is you've got to get buy-in from management. That was easy in this case because I just said we need to do this. But with clients, it's a lot harder. With clients, they don't necessarily care about these things in the way that I do. So we've got to try and sell it to them somehow. And basically it provides a focus for everybody in the design and development team if we do this. So the designers were really thinking, okay, when we're designing this page, how much are these images going to add up to? What are these fonts going to add up to? And really focuses their mind. And it gets designers and developers kind of working together right from the beginning of the project. So one of the key things we did was using lightweight fonts. So our body font is just Arial because it's a system font, so you don't need to load anything. It's already on everyone's machine. But we didn't like Arial for headings, so we chose InterUI, which is an open source font. But InterUI is 120 kilobytes. So we used a subset of InterUI that only included the characters that we need. There's only 11 kilobytes. I don't know how we did that, but Josh will know if you want to if you want to talk to Josh. Efficient imagery is really, really key. This makes a huge difference. So we specifically designed the whole website to not have any full screen images, so we're keeping them as small as possible. We use WebP format for any browsers that support it because it's much more efficient in terms of its compression. We use an image compression plugin. We use ShortPixel on the glossy setting. Jerome, who's sitting in the middle here, tested all of the kind of best WordPress image compression plugins, and we found ShortPixel Glossy kind of seems to be the best of all of them in terms of it gives you really, really good compression. It supports WebP, and the actual quality of the images after you've compressed them is really pretty good. But we also try to avoid using images in terms of JPEGs, PNGs, and GIFs, and try to design a site where some of the visual interest was created just using SVGs and pure CSS because it's just so much lighter. And then, obviously, efficient code. So avoiding any bloated frameworks that contain loads of stuff that we don't need. We use our own starter theme called Granola. Again, if you want to know why that's efficient, ask Josh. It's really out of my out of my skill set. Recycling assets. I like to use the word recycling, so I fit that in. But you can recycle on website. It's basically, instead of just having loads of stuff that's unique on every page, if you try and create a library of stuff at the beginning, or sort of design library, with the minimum number of things possible, and just reuse them everywhere, it's so much more efficient. It's just good practice, basically. And then removing any scripts that are not required. So we actually ended up removing jQuery because we found that there was nothing on the site that really needed it. So the result is our old website, 880 kilobyte homepage, 0.74 grams of CO2 per page view. And the new one, although our budget was 440 grams, it actually ended up at 195 because we were really focused on getting the page size down. And you can see the difference that's made in terms of carbon emissions, 0.24 grams of CO2 per page view. So it makes a really big difference, and it also makes a huge difference in terms of performance. You know, if you shave 75% off the size of your pages, then you're going to get a massive increase in speed. So some other tactics that are also really helpful for reducing emissions Don't use autoplay videos if you can avoid it. Make people opt in to watch a video. If they really want to see it, they'll click play. Compress video files, so don't just compress images, also compress video files. That makes a huge difference. I think we used FFmpeg, did we? Yeah. Avoid animated GIFs. They can be fun, but they're hugely inefficient. Reduce tracking and advertising scripts. So if you actually, when we look at our results from our carbon calculators, some of the least efficient websites, a lot of them are magazines and newspapers. And they don't need to be heavy because actually they're just a lot of text. But they're just full of advertising scripts and tracking scripts, and it's kind of the fact of their business. But it's really, really inefficient. It makes the website slow. So if you haven't got a really good reason, just try and reduce them. Reducing requests, reducing animations, it's all sort of just reduce everything. And people in our team are probably fed up of me saying it, but basically, if in doubt, leave it out. It's just sort of general good advice. If you can't justify why it's there, then it shouldn't be there. Get it out. Because if it is there, then every single person that visits your webpage has to load that data. So, sort of step 3 of cleaning up your website is using cleaner energy. So, as I said, it's really all about electricity consumption. And websites use electricity really in 3 places. They use it in the data centers that store our websites. They use it in the transmission networks, so telephone networks that actually send the data around the world, and in the end user devices, whether that's a phone or a laptop or a smart TV or whatever it happens to be. Now, as a web designer, developer, whoever you happen to be, basically you almost certainly have no control over end user devices because you don't know who's looking at your website, you don't know where they are, what device they're using. Transmission networks, the nature of the internet means you have basically no control over that because, again, you don't know where your users are, and the data is going to find its own way through the telecommunications networks around the world to get there. But you do have some control over the data center because you can choose where you host your website, and you can find a provider that is committed to using renewable energy. And that does make a noticeable difference to the emissions. So some WordPress hosts that are using renewable energy. So Timpani, they've got their own data center in Cambridgeshire, and they use 100% renewables. They're based actually in Soho here. WP Engine is a funny one. Some of the sites they host on Google Cloud. They're moving more and more to Google Cloud. The other ones, they're a bit vague about where they are. But you can ask them. If you say we want it on Google Cloud, then generally they're quite cooperative and they'll put it on Google Cloud for you. Raid boxes, I don't know if anyone here is familiar with raid boxes, but they're a German WordPress managed host, and they're pretty good. I've got my personal website hosted with them, and again, it's completely powered by microhydro in the area in Germany where the data center is. And Kinster is another really good WordPress host, and they are completely based on Google Cloud Platform. So, I mean, you'll notice the reason I've got Google Cloud Platform logo here is they're not a WordPress host as such, but most of the green hosting providers that you'll find now are sort of starting to piggyback off Google Cloud, just because Google's really taken a lead in committing to renewable energy, which has been fantastic. They now sort of say that they equivalent to 100% renewable powered all around the world. And they've sort of put a bit of pressure on some of the others like AWS to clean up their act, so it's really good. And a lot of these other services basically use Google Cloud, so even if they don't care about sustainability, if they're using Google Cloud, that's a good thing. And if they are like Timpani or Raid boxes and they've actually got their own sort of green power sorted out, then that's even better. If you want to look up like green hosts, the greenwebfoundation.org is basically a really comprehensive database of hosts that are using green energy. And they've got a Chrome extension that you can use, so basically any website you go to, it'll give you either a green smiley face or a black kind of sad face to tell you whether that website's hosted on green energy or not. The black sad face is more of a like, I don't know face, because sometimes it can't tell, but the green smiley face is great. And all of these hosting providers basically are working with the Green Web Foundation, so they update their IP ranges for their servers so that they can tell which websites are hosted where. So to give you a little bit of perspective, traffic makes a huge difference. And so if you're doing high traffic websites, then a little bit of efficiency or switching to a green host makes a big difference. So networkrail.co.uk gets around 1 million page views per month, so 12 million page views per year. In terms of electricity, this is crazy. It's like 114 gigawatt hours of electricity, which the fact that it's got giga on it means it's a big number. But to give you some perspective, it's like driving a Tesla 460,000 miles. So that's 18 laps around the world to power the Network Rail website. I don't think that's necessarily worth it. But it does serve a lot of people. And the annual CO2 emissions, when you actually add this up, the annual CO2 emissions, if it's hosted on standard grid energy at the data center level, is about 56 tons. So that's more CO2 than the weight of a railway carriage. But if you switch it to a renewable hosting, it's about 32 tons. So that's it's still a lot, but it's a massive difference. And this was sort of quite easy to do just by asking WP Engine to move it to Google Data Center. I'm not quite sure where it is now because it randomly moved back again at some point. But but nevertheless, it shows the impact of what can be achieved. And switching hosts, or even just asking the same host to move it to another data center, is the easiest thing you can do. So the title of my talk was basically "A Green Web is Good for Everybody," and it really is. It's not just about the environment. Basically, if you make your website more efficient, then that's going to be great for performance. That's great for user experience. It's great for SEO. It's great for accessibility in terms of people who are using slow or expensive connections. And that's a lot more people than you think. I think we get used to this idea that everyone's got fiber optic broadband. But actually, even like the people in this room probably regularly experience slow connections, whether it's sitting on the train or you're at a conference. I don't know how good the internet is here. I haven't tried it. It's probably good because we're live streaming. But also the cost of it. Like, data's cheap in the UK, but there are some countries where data's really, really expensive, and that's kind of prohibitive for some people to actually, browse websites. So if you can make it really efficient, then you're really helping your users. You can also save on hosting costs. If you've got a really high traffic site and you can make it really efficient, you can significantly reduce the sort of server resources that you're paying for. And all earthlings will benefit, basically, because we're going to reduce CO2. So just to sort of round up, we're currently working with a whole bunch of other people in the web community who are interested in sustainability on a sort of open sustainable web manifesto. It's got 6 main areas that we're sort of working on writing. That the products and services we create for the web should aim to be clean, efficient, safe, useful, inclusive, and economic. And I think they're sort of good principles to sort of take away with you today and think about in all the projects that you do. If you're interested in all this sort of stuff to do with sustainability in the web, talk to anybody at Wholegrain. We'd love to have you involved, get you involved in the manifesto or anything to do with web sustainability. I'm always up for it. And you can contact me, tom@wholegraindigital.com, or tweet @eatwholegrain. Question.
Tom, excellent. Thank you very much. I think we all agree. Excellent talk. There's so much good stuff to take away from that. We do have time for some questions, if we have any at all from the audience.
Hi there, Tom. First of all, very informative speech. I mean, I've never thought that not loading a JavaScript library could just help save the planet. Now I'm thinking, if I text people less on the phone and meet them in person, do I actually help save the planet? My question to you is about the calculator that you actually called an estimator. So you're basically asking about the website and the number of visitors. Now, of course, I don't know exactly what is happening under the hood, but I can assume it somehow calculates the weight of the page in terms of kilobytes and data.
Exactly.
Somehow puts it inside of an equation with the number of visitors, and then estimates the number of output. But now I'm thinking server performance in terms of if a server is highly optimized, like doing all the proper caching and the like, versus really raw servers not optimized at all. The difference could be, in terms of energy consumption, could be much higher than rather the, let's say, what you said, from 880 kilobytes down to 200. That's actually a massive difference. But if you take this website and put it in a completely unoptimized servers, the results could be disastrous, even further than 800 kilobyte on a massively optimized server. So I was actually very amazed that you did not specify this at all in your recommendation. So I was wondering just what your thoughts on this are. All very
yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're probably right. It should have been on my list of things to do. As I said, any carbon calculator is an estimator, and you have to make assumptions, and you've got to sort of draw system boundaries somewhere. So we've looked at the stuff that we can actually detect, and looking at how well optimized an individual website server is something that maybe it's possible, but in terms of a sort of initial public calculator where we don't know who these people are, it's not something that we can easily detect. But you're 100% right that it is really, really important, and a well-optimized server is going to be way more efficient in terms of its energy consumption than a completely unoptimized server. So I would love it if someone finds data on how that actually adds up, because that would be amazing to actually see that. But even in the absence of that data, your point is valid for everybody in every project, that basically using really well-optimized servers is always going to save energy, even if we don't know how much it is.
Excellent, thank you. Any other questions at all? Yeah, we've got several. If you're out there on the live stream as well, we've got several people joining us at the moment. Feel free to tweet a question to @WPLDN. Sorry, who was the question?
Hi. You had your simple system diagram at the beginning with servers, network, and client, essentially. Yeah. Do you have a feel for the balance between those three worldwide as to which area is, what proportion there is in those three?
Yeah, so I'm terrible at remembering numbers, but from what I remember, it's roughly 40% data center usage, 40% telecommunication networks, and about 20% end user devices. So again, obviously, there's assumptions made. So end user devices can vary massively in terms of their energy consumption. You could be on a sort of gaming desktop, or you could be on a phone. It makes a big difference. But in terms of just sort of averages, it's roughly sort of 40 data center, 40 telecommunication networks, and about 20 end user devices.
Thank you. I think there's another question here.
Is this okay? Oh, hi there. Thanks for the talk. That was very interesting. Just a couple of questions about the saving from a page going from 880 to 200 kilobytes. In terms of the plugins listed, were those free plugins, or were there some costs involved in terms of just thinking of selling it to my management? And in terms of giving the hosting cost argument, is there a kind of trade-off between paying for these compression algorithms and saving? And the second question is, just in terms of, this is my first time here, so I don't know, it's maybe more of a general question about plugins. If you do add more plugins and then something goes wrong, is there sort of a time cost involved, because there's more moving parts potentially in terms of getting down to what's gone wrong? So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the initial question, which I think was about the cost of using things like image compression plugins, so in our case we use Short Pixel. We also tried Tiny PNG. We had previously tried WC Smush. What else did we use, Jerome? Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So a lot of them have like very cheap plans. I mean, it depends on how many images you have, basically. So they normally price it either sort of per megabyte or per image that they're going to optimize for you. So, but it's an incremental cost. I mean, if it was your personal website, you probably wouldn't have that many images anyway. I don't know. Maybe you would. if you're a photographer or something. But you're talking like at most probably for a normal website like tens of dollars a month. You're not talking hundreds or thousands. So it's relatively inexpensive to do, but the performance benefit is really significant. So it's easily worth it. If it's a commercial website in particular, then it will pay for itself. And I think everything else that we did pretty much was just our time to actually look at the details and, like removing jQuery, for example, like it takes time because it's sort of, you've got to unpick it and make sure everything still works. But if you can invest the time, then that's fine. As a general question, yeah, the more plugins you add, the more sort of interactions sort of between each plugin, the more risk there is that something goes wrong. But I don't think we've had any bad experiences specifically with like ShortPixel, for example, conflicting with any others. Yeah.
The main thing that we kind of worked with when building the site was efficiency by design. So it's not trying to think about what can I do after the fact. The whole site was designed with one objective of to get customers interested in what we're selling, really, but also to do it in an efficient way. So it's the whole process, the not loading things you don't need, the designing to utilize assets in the most powerful way that you can rather than just putting more on the page.
Yeah, and in terms of plugins, it's basically the less plugins you add is not just more efficient, but it's less maintenance, as you're saying. So it's kind of a win-win. Just if in doubt, leave it out.
Excellent. We've got time for just one more question, I'm afraid. Sorry.
Oh, it is a plugin, but in that case, we were not in doubt.
Thanks very much, Tom. I'm looking forward to version 3 of your website, which is going to be only ASCII art.
We're going to be competing with David and Kay.
You might have to rename to, like Hacker Grain or Anoni Grain or something like that. So my question's again around the system boundary on the calculator or the estimator. A few years ago, I looked at doing similar calculation and thought of bringing in. Thought of bringing in to the calculation the footprint of us in the office of the agency working on the website to build it and to maintain it, and also the client side, all their time in commuting into offices and spending time in offices doing everything their side, and that ended up being about a third. So I sort of everything else was 2/3, but about a third was and again it was complete lots of estimations and assumptions. But then that brings in some interesting points. One kind of positive outcome from the perspective of the agency is that obviously the higher your day rate, the less time you're going to be spending, and therefore the less carbon in your website. But anyway, it's food for thought, maybe. And did you include that in any way?
So obviously we can't factor it into the website carbon.com because we don't know who developed the website. But it is, I mean, as a company, we're always looking how we can reduce our emissions, and I think there's two factors there. I mean, one is just whoever's developing the website, whether it's an individual at home or whether it's like an agency or in-house at a company, like how are they operating in terms of their energy use of the office space and how much traveling they're going to do. A project where you fly a client or you go and fly to America to see a client is going to be, off the charts in terms of carbon emissions compared to one where you develop it in your bedroom in your spare time. But equally, traffic is a factor. So, if you're the proportion, you said 30% as a sort of an average, but if you're developing a website that's like your personal blog, like let's say my blog, no one reads it. So, yeah. So if like the carbon emissions per like my proportion of carbon emissions in terms of the design and development is enormous. But if you're looking at something like Network Rail or like really high traffic website, and you've got a whole team of people working on it, the actual proportion of the agency or the team of it is actually relatively small because the annual emissions are just off the charts. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tom. I'm afraid we have run out of time for questions, but we are going to go into a break now, so I guess there are several more questions there. If you've got them, if you grab Tom, I'm sure they'll be happy to answer them. But please do give Tom a big round of applause. Clearly a subject that a lot of us are interested and inspired by. So, Tom, thank you. We are going to take a quick break now. There might be some pizza and some drinks left over, so please feel free to grab those. We're going to be back here in about 5 minutes, so just a quick break. But can I just ask you to take your seats, and we'll come in for the second and final speaker of the evening. Welcome back. Welcome back if you're on the live stream. Welcome back if you're here. We are now ready to get started. So I'm going to introduce you to Chris. Chris is a self-taught developer who is currently a senior full-stack developer at Air Media. Chris is going to be talking to us this evening about WooCommerce and taking it beyond an e-commerce platform. So please, big round of applause for Chris.
Okay, hi everyone. So as Dan explained, I'm going to be talking about WooCommerce tonight, and specifically how you can use WooCommerce beyond pure e-commerce applications in building your WordPress sites. So just a quick question. Who here has used WooCommerce on their sites? Okay, I guessed most have. Has anyone used any other e-commerce plugins or frameworks for it? Yep, and what did you use? Any others particularly? Any other yeah. Okay. Well, so there are actually several other solutions for WordPress. WooCommerce is not the only solution. There's WP Shop, MarketPress, ECWid, and Jigo Shop, and Paid Memberships Pro, and also Give and Cart66. WooCommerce was actually originally a fork of Jigo Shop, which is where it got its start from. And Give is actually specifically for the charity sector, mostly for donations. Paid Memberships Pro is, as the name suggests, for memberships. So WooCommerce is particularly good because it kind of can follow all of these models. And you can actually extend it as if you write custom code alongside your WordPress site, you can actually extend it a lot more fully beyond just what comes out the box. So why use it in WordPress projects? Well, yeah, that's my reason would be because it's just simply extendable. It's very flexible, and it's very well supported, and there's a huge community around that. Well, another reason it's easy for clients to use post-development. Editing products, adding products, updating categories and so on, it's just like any other post. It's essentially a post type that's added into the WordPress install, and then any custom fields and such can be added through that. Now, this is where I think is the real strength with WooCommerce versus other e-commerce plugins for WordPress. It has a huge number of hooks and filters built into the plugin, which actually can add almost limitless flexibility. And it also allows you to, for example, you can have certain actions happen at certain stages of the e-commerce journey. So you could have a certain action or field update take place at checkout or when a certain product is added to a cart. And other potential uses beyond just plain e-commerce. So in this, we're talking about, for example, having it integrated directly with your content, which, as I'm going to explain later on, is actually a very big thing for the future. content being integrated with e-commerce is going to be a huge thing for the future, and can be directly integrated into a custom theme. But as you notice, there is an asterisk. So you can integrate WooCommerce into your theme, but it is a little bit tricky. But it is there, and you do need to update it with each update. So it's not a perfect thing, but you can integrate it quite closely. Right. So what is the future of e-commerce, and how is that affected? How does that affect WooCommerce? Well, the future is impossible to see, as Yoda tells us, but we can make some very good guesses. And so I'll go through there is a journalist called Herbert Louis who actually he has 10 predictions for the future of e-commerce, particularly in 2018 and beyond, which some of those we have already started to see occur. One of the very interesting points is e-commerce is a growing sector, but it still only makes up 1% of all retail sales. And a lot of that 11.9% is held by the major key players. For example, Amazon, eBay, and so on. But there is a lot more providers in e-commerce, but it's just the market share is still predominantly bricks and mortar. But we do see a lot of multi-channel e-commerce. So in terms of anywhere buying, both means in terms of outside a shop, but possibly at a kiosk or so on, or at events and so on. There's a lot of purchases like that. And we do see with WooCommerce, there is now a WooCommerce point of sale plugin, which extends WooCommerce to account for offline sales or account for sales say at a shop that's run by the same organization. So that is a very interesting thing that you can use WooCommerce for, to link. If you, for example, if you have a client with a bricks and mortar shop, but they also sell online, you could have their inventories matched up closely. E-commerce automation is now an accessible reality. A lot of that is actually, some of that does come from the point of sale integration with e-commerce, where inventory can be closely matched between different locations, and a sale within a bricks and mortar shop can easily update a web database if they are linked in such a way. That's a very crude example, but we are seeing more automation. Mobile is the new normal, but adds purchase complexities. A lot of these complexities are around largely around actually how to grab attention of audiences and actually create a mobile user experience while also having something that's intuitive for people purchasing. So it is the same challenges that we get with building mobile-based websites, but with e-commerce it does add a little bit more complication. Native social selling is finally delivering results. It has been a thing for a while, but we are now starting to see that it actually is delivering results. There are e-commerce functions built into many social networks, and now they are actually starting to pick up much more than they were. The very surprising thing, though, international e-commerce is still largely untapped. Aside from a few major key players, it's still there's not much going on internationally. Of course, there are around the world there are localized businesses that sell to their local continents or local on a national level. But in terms of a business that has actually successfully made a business around the world, that's still something largely to be seen. Because even in the case of Amazon, we see that that's actually many businesses operating simultaneously. At least that's almost the model they take. But it's still largely untapped to see an e-commerce being used adequately around the globe. And as I mentioned, content is the holy grail of e-commerce engagement. because we are seeing a future in e-commerce, and we have seen some examples of this already, as many of you have probably already seen. A lot of e-commerce is now, there is a lot more content around it, and there's a lot more of a story around purchasing. Things like sponsored content is a very big thing. Sponsored blog posts, which is usually with the aim of selling something, and may even have the option to buy on that post. So that is, when we say that content is now the holy grail of e-commerce engagement, it means creating engaging content that's not, that treads that fine line between informative and interesting and actually a sales pitch. Micro moments are the new battleground for optimization. So this is largely based around the keeping the attention span and taking advantage of very key moments, taking advantage of impulse purchases and the being able to convince users to purchase on a whim. If it's almost presenting options that they probably didn't think that, or would not think of after, or not before. But it's based largely, it's very similar to the content argument. Another very interesting one I saw was that the business-to-business e-commerce actually dwarfs business-to-consumer. Here we see 3 of the largest business-to-business organizations. You have Microsoft, the largest business-to-business provider in the world, Xerox, another, and IBM Systems. Much of them are in the technology space, but definitely not all of them. And fragmentation is e-commerce's biggest challenge. The key challenge here is actually creating adequately marketing products to users. So we can obviously use big data and so on to target consumers, but that's still largely guesswork. And because everybody is unique, there is still a real challenge to actually adequately market the products. So now specifically into WooCommerce and potential projects with WooCommerce. One which I have a lot of experience with is a freemium-based membership-based online service. As a proof of concept, I have also built a very basic CRM or web-based tool for use within an organization. That works very well in multi-site environments. So if you have a eBay store, you can have another website on that same network that operates as a CRM for your users. So you can take in a multi-site setup, you can take data from your shop and serving it within a CRM application for example, for your clients, maybe if they want to have a separate area to see sales information in an accessible way, for example. Bookings for holidays and services. There is a WordPress, a WooCommerce extension for this. It's just called WooCommerce R&B, so rooms and bookings. There's also paid job listings or similar, auctions, marketplaces, and really any kind of transactional business. As I mentioned, there is the Give plugin, which is built specifically for the non-profit sector to take donations, but that could actually be built with WooCommerce also. And particularly if you perhaps are managing a site or building a site for a non-profit that also sells items on site, on their website, then you can, rather than having both, just use the one. So I was previously senior developer at Family Traveller. It's a media-based organisation, and I had the challenge of we had a WooCommerce shop, but there was one particular product which was this company. They essentially marketed holidays, but through content. It was essentially travel journalism. So, but they also had something called their Family Traveller Club, where they would, for users could pay for a premium premium membership on the site, and that would give them access to discounts and family days out and so on. Now, the challenge here was to ensure that when people purchased this particular product, that they could only that they saw elements of the website that were not open to them previously. And WooCommerce by default does not complete the order at the point of payment. So also had to complete the order at that point so the users could see it right away. So this explains basically the order was auto completed through a function that I wrote, and they were assigned a new role which then provided them with access to other elements of that site. And it was just this code sample. So this WooCommerce thank you is it's a WooCommerce hook, and there are many WooCommerce hooks available to do this type of thing. There's plenty of them, and they can hook into different stages of the e-commerce journey. There's more samples of that. Has anyone got any questions so far? No. Okay. Okay. Right. So it is also possible to create functions to display a product feed catered to individual users. By this, I mean you can cater it to purchase history, content viewed, so any blog posts they've actually viewed in the past, and any of the user metadata, which would be, for example, their postcode, or even elements such as what country they reside in, or so on. And you could actually take the average order value, so you can assign a user field with some PHP coding. You can assign a user field that takes the users, all of their orders, takes the total value, and then finds an average between them. I won't actually show you, I'll actually show you an example of this. Okay, so right, so I built a very basic WooCommerce shop on my local host just to demonstrate this. It's a very crude example of how you can cater the recommended or a similar feed that's recommended to users based on their purchase history on that site. So here it's all Nintendo based stuff because I've set that as a interest group for the test user that I've set up. Now, and there's a most popular feed as well, which adds a field to the product, which number of times that's been in an order. Now, so I'm going to, let's say I purchase a PHP elephant plush. So add the coupon, so I'm not charged. So that's the order complete there. So now on the front end we should see, yeah, a slightly different feed. Now because it's only 3 products at the moment, it's showing just the tech. If we added more, it should show a mix of tech and the other category. To prove that, I will actually go to the profile and show you that, you see, there are actually both fields in there, which one was not in there previously. So this is an example. It's a very crude example. There are much more complicated ways you could do this. But for the purposes of this demonstration, I thought I'd put together a very basic example to show that. Now, Now, as I mentioned, there's also the possibility to create like a CRM-like interface for WooCommerce. I personally would do this through if it was part of an e-commerce site, then I would, as I have done in the example I'm about to show you, it's a WordPress multi-site network, but the shop is one of the subsites, and the CRM is another subsite on there that collects data from the e-commerce shop. So here's an example of the CRM. Just some test customer names in there, and a collection of data on those customers. So let's look at my orders. You can see now here I've actually done it leading back to the admin page, but you, in a full CRM application, you can create a separate page that actually calls that data from there. So it could post to another PHP template within the theme, which will display that data, or so on. As I mentioned, there are many hooks, filters, and functions with WooCommerce, which adds so many levels of flexibility, and that is really one of its real strong points. Here's just a few examples. So WooCommerce Add to Cart, that, as the name suggests, it just, as soon as a particular product is added to cart, or any product, you can use that hook to call a PHP function. Update customer, when a customer data is updated. Order status, when it's marked as complete, that one is. And there's some others here too, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but I will link to this, which just demonstrates exactly how many possibilities there are for the flexibility of WooCommerce. This list is so long, but it does show how finely grained you can actually make the experience in terms of if that means updating data, or calling the script in at a certain time, or redirecting at certain points, or so on. And there, as I mentioned, there are many add-ons as well. Many of them you can find through the plugin repository on WordPress.org. The WordPress Multilingual WPML. Now that's just it just essentially translates WooCommerce very well, if needed. And WooChimp works closely with MailChimp. WooCommerce Point of Sale, as you saw on the pages previous, you saw the screenshot of the site for that. So it can hook with a point of sale system, or in a store, a bricks and mortar store. It can, with the correct equipment, you can match it to the WooCommerce shop. WooCommerce PDF invoices, very good for B2B, because it allows users to actually have access to PDF invoices alongside their sales. As Amazon affiliates, that's I've not come across that one, but I know it's used for working with Amazon Marketplace affiliate stuff. And as I mentioned, it was actually rentals and bookings for WooCommerce. So that's for rooms and service bookings and so on. WooCommerce CSV importer, that does exist, but I generally like to use WP All Import for this sort of job, because this also works well with any other post types. And CoinGate for WooCommerce is a pretty new one, that this accepts allows acceptance of cryptocurrencies within your WooCommerce build. So, I mean, that's the end of my talk. But yeah, okay.
Excellent, Chris. Thank you very much. We do have time for any questions, if we have any at all.
Do you put the code of the example on GitHub, or do you have some source of the code?
I am planning to put it on GitHub. Yes, I am planning to put that on GitHub. It's just a test plugin I built for testing basic functions.
It's
So, yeah.
very, very cool.
Yeah.
And it's possible. Another question.
Yeah.
Do you have some problems maybe when you WooCommerce have a lot of products? Do you have reached the limits of the platform maybe in some of your project?
Technically, there are no set limits. Technically, if there are limits, that would largely depend on
The server.
whether your server's able to cope with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think they're also currently developing something so that products go in a separate table, and there's also a plugin you can use, I think, to manage orders. But I've got a question, because we've got quite a few WooCommerce websites that we maintain, and one of our major issues when we're sort of testing updates or major changes is keeping orders synced between a development site and a live site. And if anybody has got any tips on that or how they do it, I'd be really interested, because it can be painful trying to sort it out.
I think you
that
could probably use the WordPress API to do that. WP API possibly to sync between the two, or yeah.
Yeah, so you're talking about merging live with dev. Yes. Merging databases, yes. Yeah. Yeah, I think if anybody's got the answer to that, they're very rich. Do we have any particular tools that people use? Migrate DB Pro in terms of, sorry?
Yeah.
So does anybody have any tools they use for that migrating of live to dev in terms of for these kinds of instances with WooCommerce installs? Silence.
Well, I'm not sure if this is what you're looking for or if it helps. It's not specifically about WooCommerce. The platform Pantheon has something similar to this. So basically you have this, and I think WP Engine has it as well. You basically have three so yeah, so basically it's not in real time, but it has what's it called, like basically it's backups. It backs up these three things: code, uploads, and database. And basically you can just make a backup of one and apply it to another, and make it's pretty quick. It takes like a minute, but yeah.
It's more merging the live database, yes. Yeah. Do any other questions for Chris with regards to WooCommerce at all? No? Okay, well, Chris, thank you very much. That's trying to merge live to core. Live to dev. If anybody does have anything, we'd love to speak with you. Okay, so just before we finish up, I just want to say a few things quickly. Just want to thank each and every one of our speakers this evening. Both Chris and Tom have given their time to us this evening to share their knowledge. If anybody in the room here has anything that they'd love to share with us, they think they've done something in a particular way, they're aware of doing things that maybe you think may be unique, or you just simply have maybe a way of working that you want to share, we'd love to hear from you. We're always looking for speakers. We are now looking into 2019, so if you are interested in giving a talk, do come and speak to either Gary over here, Paul. Where's Paul? Can't see you, Paul. Hiding away over there somewhere. Behind the pillar? Over there. Diane or myself, because we'd love to hear from you. The next event will be here on the 29th of November. That will be the last formal meetup for 2018. We are still as yet to work out what we do about December. That's something. Party, yes. So yeah, love to see you here, 29th of November. We also are always looking for feedback. Please do head over to wplgn.uk/feedback. You'll be redirected to a Google form. You'll be asked to answer a maximum of 4 questions. You don't have to share any personal information, so please don't be scared about any of that stuff. But it does help us. It really does help us to evolve these events into something that is appropriate for us, the community. So we'd love to hear from you. If you're able to, we're now going to head over to a local bar for a social. We're going to head over to the Cross Keys, which is out the door. Take a right, up to the road, take a right, and you're pretty much there. If you're not familiar with it, just tag along. We'll all get lost together. I just want to say a big thank you to all our sponsors, SiteGround, WP Engine, Plesk, Weglot, and Yoti, particularly Yoti, for hosting us again this evening. Other than that, I want to say a big thank you to all of you for coming this evening and making another night. So thank you very much. Good night. Please do just stick your rubbish in the bins as you go. That'd be great. Thank you.